Buddha used to say that words were signposts, and he meant it quite literally, because I can point to this table or to this whiteboard, but equally I could just say whiteboard, table, without pointing, and they both actually serve the same function. And that's all fine when we're talking about physical objects, because I can always support any lack of understanding with a gesture. So even if you don't understand the language I'm speaking, if I want to point out some tomatoes to you and they're in front of you, I can just point to the tomato, can't I? But what about if I want to talk about how I'm feeling? Where do I point? I want to point to my happiness or my sadness. A lot of people, when I ask them that, they'll point to their heart. And I'll say, well, you know, all that does is tell you I might be feeling something. It doesn't tell you what I'm feeling. Because the feeling body, or the emotional body, is the next body after the physical, we have an indicator in our body that can show you what I'm feeling. And it is, of course, the face. So, even if I am struggling to express how I'm feeling, you could easily tell whether I'm happy or sad based on my facial expression, because I could be like, or. So if I'm like this, you may walk in and say, Darren, hey, you're not looking that happy today. You want to talk about it? And I might say, yes, thank you. But more often than not, what I would say is, no, I'm fine. Now what happens there, that is actually, and I'm sure you've all done this, this is an example of where we use spells to point people away from our internal reality. We use spells to misdirect people. And we all do it, so we commonly accept it. But it's so deeply ingrained in us that we're not aware of when it's appropriate to allow ourselves to be mispointed, and when we can identify we're being mispointed, remembering they're signposts, and to push past that mispointing. So if you were a friend of mine, and I said, oh, no, I'm fine, then they might say, oh, don't give me that, that's rubbish, I can clearly see there's something wrong with you, come on, let's have it. But if you didn't know me, and you maybe weren't that confident about it, you would just accept my mispointing. And this is where we all use spells to control who gets to see our internal truth. And it's a very, very basic example of it. But when we go beyond the realm of emotions, and we get into the realm of the mind, and we want to talk about things which have only mental substance. So, you know, a table has physical substance. You know, my sadness doesn't really. It may make things move within me, but physically I can't point it to you. But what about politics, or morality, or existentialism, or philosophy? These things have no emotional substance, unless we feel something about them, and they certainly have no physical substance. So, how can I point them out to you? If you don't know what politics is, how can you see my point? How can you get the point of what I'm trying to explain? And this is where our use of words becomes ever more important. Words are indeed come into their own in the realms of the mind. The very structures of geometry that they're made up of are of mental substance themselves. So, if I'm trying to point something out to you, what's actually happening is I'm using living language in this instance, because I'm speaking to you. I'm using living spells and intonation, timing, inflection, all these sorts of things to make a point. And I'm assembling all these signposts, all these spells, to try to make a point. And this is where meaning can happen. What is meaning? I bet you all know what meaning is, but are you able to describe it to anybody? Could you explain to somebody what meaning is if they didn't know? It's one of these abstractions that we all understand because we learnt it at a very young age, when we were very mentally capable. But then as we become too ingrained in our mental frameworks, we've actually lost some of that acuity and astuteness that we had. Meaning, I need you to think about maths for a moment. And in maths, the mean is obviously the average. So meaning is the average of the spells that I have cast, taking into account the order, the intonation, the inflection, the timing, the gesturing, all the things that go with it, will determine whether you get the point or not. Now, it's not just about me and my skills as a communicator that count, it's yours as a listener as well. It requires acuity and agility to be able to see the point. And this is again what Buddha's getting at when he's talking about them being signposts, because this is the idea that, the map is not the territory. If I show you a mapped direction to a lake, that is not the same as going and seeing the lake and experiencing it yourself, is it? And this is the case with a lot of the spells that I'm trying to point out to you, and some of the ideas that I'm trying to help adjust your mental framework to handle, is to make points that indicate things outside the normal cultural mental framework, but which are still firmly within your experiential capacity as a human being with a mind to experience and know. And this is how we truly expand our mind. But it does require that we are able to follow points. And this is where we have terms like, I don't see where you're going with this. Yeah, I can see your point, but I have a different point of view. No, I can't see what you're getting at. And this is because of a thing called understanding. Because if you can get the point, and I mean actually get the point, you arrive in a position of understanding the point, whatever it is. If you truly understand something, then you can point it out to anybody, regardless of their perspective. That is true understanding. Very, very few people have true understanding of anything. So what we end up with is, we end up with people who like being around like-minded people, because, I don't have a different coloured pen, I'm afraid, because they have a similar perspective. Like-minded people have a similar perspective. So you could say you're like-minded friends who watch the same things as you are and do the same things you do and have the same sort of conversations, might be over here. And when you're talking to each other, the communication is easy, it flows. You can buzz off each other and go, yeah, I get that, oh yeah, it's all great, brilliant. The problems we encounter, though, are when we find people with a different point of view. Most especially those with an opposing point of view to us. Now the point is, pardon the pun, one of the points is anyway, that the very terminology of, I have a different point of view, I can see what you mean, but, all of these things actually indicate a shared mental space. Pause and consider that. A shared mental space. Because if we're referring to the same thing and acknowledging different points of view around the same points, then we're talking about distance, location, and specificity. It's no different from saying, shall we meet at the cafe tomorrow at 2? If we both arrive at said cafe and perceive each other, then that in itself is evidence of a shared physical space. So we share physical space, and we can all acknowledge it every time we agree to meet and then actually meet. However, we're not so au fait with the fact that we share mental space too. And this is all about shared meanings, perspectives, and locations. This is where it gets really interesting. So, the challenge a lot of people have is when they're speaking to people or trying to convey points to people who are not like-minded. And what we encounter then is a tension of communication. So tension occurs. And we will often back off from that without trying to make our point properly. This is why we have disparate groups in the world, because what you end up with is lots of people who have different perspectives on the same points. So you could say religion and science often seem to have opposing views on the same things, but they're talking about the same thing, and they are exploring the same thing. They just denoting a different terminology. Our problem as humans is that we will create division as a result of our lack of ability to come to shared terms or shared perspective, when in actual fact we don't need to. I'm digressing a little bit there on the subject of meaning. All I want to convey in this video, really, without getting too much into a big talk on meaning and shared mental space, is to consider that when you're trying to convey things to people, consider whether they're like-minded or not, and maybe make that extra effort if they're not, to just guide them a bit more carefully. Just be a bit more attentive to the fact that a person may need a few more signposts to go around the point for a bit. You know, I'm going to guide you round here because you don't see my point of view, guide you round here, and then all of a sudden, ta-da, you can share my point of view because I've guided you to it. That is communication. It's totally different from expressing yourself. Expressing yourself is just standing there going, rah, 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 this is how I see it. Communication takes into account the perspective of the other party and seeks to unite perspectives, to build a bridge, to build an effective interface or an effective communication. Very, very, very different things. The other point I want to make about meaning is to do with shifting meaning, shifted meaning. So in most of these spell videos, most of you will be going, oh my goodness, didn't get that about the collar cuff tie or about the onwards and upwards or this sort of thing. And this is because what's happened is the point of meaning has shifted over time. So you have people who don't understand sharing a subject with somebody else when they don't fully understand it, but they're sharing it as if they understood it. So you'll have a parent dictating to a child what meaning is or what philosophy is or what religion is, when actually they don't understand. Their point of understanding might be over here. And they're pontificating as if they're a know-it-all, and they're saying, well son, this is how it is. Well daughter, this is how it is. And this child ends up with a skewed understanding. They haven't actually got the point. And then they might go on and communicate to their friend, but because they haven't fully got it, they end up over here. And then they try and communicate to somebody what it is, and they end up away over here. And then before you know it, nobody's got the point anymore. And this is what's happened not only with our language, but it's also what's happened with our religion. And a lot of our most profound ideas is because meaning and understanding were lost, nobody got the point anymore, and the position of meaning moved and moved and moved until it was pointless. Pointless. And it means there's no point. And this is what happens when people are talking about something that they don't understand. If you're listening to a politician and they're trying not to answer something which they are taught to do, then what they'll be doing is they'll be chucking their spells up into the air and they will be going nowhere. And you can mentally spot this in nanoseconds. And that's why most of us will just go and switch off pretty quickly because we understand that it's pointless. And we have a term for that we often call stabbing in the dark, which is when somebody's just chucking spells up in the hope that it lands at some point of meaning. But there's a lot of stabbing in the dark going on in the world at the minute, and a lot of pointless communication that leads nowhere. Okay? What we've got to try and do is get to things which have meaning, things which refer to substance, and get away from too much pointless communication. So, in future, if somebody's saying something and they're not really getting it, don't be afraid to point out that it's pointless. Thank you.